Good afternoon and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. On tonight's programme, as the European Union launches an anti-trafficking operation, we look at how this will affect migrants making the treacherous journey across the Mediterranean Sea. We'll also be looking at the peace deal in Mali between Tuareg rebel groups and the government. But before that, in Afghanistan, the country's parliament was evacuated earlier today during a coordinated attack by Taliban gunmen. All 6 of the attackers were shot by the police. This is the most high-profile attack so far in the increasingly fierce summer offensive by the group. Nathaneal Amos-Sansam has this report.
The
scene in the Afghan Parliament earlier today, the moment that a Taliban bomb parked outside detonated near the entrance of the building. Afghan police said that 6 Taliban gunmen took up positions near the front of the Parliament after the bomb exploded. Security forces say they killed all 6 after a gun battle that lasted nearly 2 hours. None of the members of Parliament were said to have been hurt in the attack, but at least 21 civilians were said to have been injured. Speaking from a meeting of defence ministers in Brussels, the head of NATO said the organisation, which formerly was in charge of military operations in the country, would strengthen its alliance with the Afghan government.
They continue to face considerable challenges. I strongly condemn the attack on the Afghan Parliament today. This is an attack on democracy. The Afghan forces stand their ground. They and the Afghan people deserve our full support.
Violent attacks in Afghanistan have increased since the departure of most foreign forces at the end of last year. The insurgent group is pushing to take territory more than 13 years after the US-led military intervention, which toppled it from power. Critics say the Taliban have filled the vacuum which was created by NATO withdrawal, and that the international community has overlooked Afghanistan due to the rise of the group Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. But as things stand following this shocking attack, the instability which has plagued Afghanistan for most of its modern history looks set to grow.
Well, to discuss all that with me in the studio is Dr Mohammad Hotak, President of the British Chamber of Commerce, and on Skype I'm joined by Paul Schulte, who's the Honorary Professor at the University of Birmingham. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Dr Hotak, does this attack tell us that the Taliban are perhaps more powerful than they've recently been?
I mean, John, this is not, in the past 3 months, there's been quite a few attacks in Kabul. I came back from Kabul only about 10 days ago. There was an attack on the Ministry of Justice. There were attacks on some foreign staying hotels, where foreigners stay. And then this attack. I don't know if Taliban have really got more power, or they're succeeding in what they're doing in attacking these high-profile targets. But what they have definitely succeeded in is killing a lot of innocent civilians again. We have seen that there were no parliamentarians killed in today's attack. There were no police officers or soldiers killed, but there were 31 civilians injured. And this is just in line with many other attacks that have taken place in Kabul, which mainly kills a lot of civilians. Afghanistan, a poor country, distributed aid in a province to 75 families. There is a lot of poverty in that part of the world. People struggle to live their everyday lives. And attacks like these only make it worse for the common citizens of Afghanistan and these civilians. So I think although the Taliban have failed in achieving their military objectives, most likely, and what they have succeeded in is killing more civilians, which is un-Islamic, which is inhumane in a very holy month of Ramadan.
Paul Schulte, what do you make of it? Is this just one in a series of attacks, or is it taking the campaign to a different level as far as the Taliban are concerned?
Well, this attack itself, I think, is one in a series, and it doesn't seem to have been all that effectively exercised and arranged. They didn't get in. All 6 were killed rather quickly. They unfortunately only killed 2 civilians, but it was not a particularly impressive display of murderousness. But it's part of a wider situation in which the Taliban do seem to have been taking some ground, particularly in Kunduz, where the regional capital is contested, as well as in their traditional strength in the south, in Helmand. And they seem to be intensifying their efforts generally to get a better political settlement, perhaps not with a government that they're trying to overthrow, but with Afghan constituencies and tribes. And also they've got an interest in frightening away the Islamic State, indicating that they're not afraid of them. They will destroy them if the Islamic State tries to establish itself in Afghanistan.
Okay, well,
so all in all, it's a rather complicated situation, of which this is just a rather visible emblem.
Okay, well, we'll come back to some of that in a minute, Paul, but first, Dr. Hotak, what's the government's likely response going to be?
I mean, what the government has done over and over again with similar attacks in the past is a lot of talk, no action. It seems like the current government of Dr. Ghani is all over the place. I recently wrote an article where I suggested that what the government really needs to do is to focus on security. If they can ensure security, Afghanistan can have most of its other things, everyday life things, business, commerce, and life for citizens can be much more easier. But the problem is that it seems like the current government is stuck with a lot of internal problems politically. Then there is a lot of problems with neighbors, although Dr. Ghani has succeeded in establishing and signing certain strategic agreements. But still, it seems like there is a lack in focus on security. And I think if the government can ensure that, it seems like obviously there has been a failure of security, that this attack has not been prevented. Yet, despite the fact that there were some very brave soldiers who foiled the attack, and the attackers did not succeed in causing a lot of problems, like Paul said, but still the attack was on one of the most prominent institutions in Afghanistan. And I think it's very important for the government that they have a clear strategy to deal with security and gain the confidence of the people. It seems like in the last 2 months there has been a number of attacks, kidnappings and attacks, like Paul said, in the north of Afghanistan by Taliban or other militant groups in the region. And the government seems to have no clear strategy how to deal with them, despite the fact that the military is doing really good. But I think the government needs to do a lot more to win the trust of the people, to ensure that there is a government in place and Afghanistan can defend itself.
Paul, do you read it that way, that the government is too internally divided and has been incapable of mounting a proper security operation?
Well, it seems to have been slow. I mean, that's true. And the exact timing for the attack yesterday was only now was a defense minister being nominated and agreed. And that clearly is a big problem if you can't get a defense minister in a country in the middle of a civil war. But I think we should remember that Ashraf Ghani has gone a long way to trying to avoid division within his government. He's got Abdullah as his chief executive, and that's quite remarkable that these two were neck and neck in the presidential elections. And they are forming a sort of unified, they call it a national government, national unity government. And in an Afghanistan which has been so divided, that's not a small achievement. But it's not by itself going to win the war with the Taliban.
Dr. Hotak, do you think that was an achievement or a mistake, that you had two contending presidential candidates after the election? They both agreed to be in the government. Do you think that strengthened Afghans' faith in democracy, or did it make them feel that whichever way you vote, you get the government?
Just before the elections, me and Paul were on Islam Channel talking about the exact points. And I thought then, and I still think now, that the unity government is a blessing in disguise for Afghanistan. These two leaders can do a lot together for Afghanistan than they could have done on their own. But what is very important is that they have very coordinated and united strategy and vision for Afghanistan, where they can pool together their strengths and their resources to actually serve Afghanistan. What we see sometimes is that there is still some internal politics that comes into play when the two leaders in Afghanistan are working together, and these are mainly based on the political seats that they want to have in terms of ministries or foreign diplomatic posts and other posts in the government. But I think the both leaders should see a lot at a greater picture than their personal or political party interests and work together for Afghanistan. Afghanistan is going through a very serious period of its history, and I think together they're a better news for Afghanistan, and I think together they can do a lot more for Afghanistan and hopefully have a chance of future government when the future elections are there. So they shouldn't be just thinking about now, they should be thinking about the future as well. So I think it's good that we have a unity government, and I think it's good for Afghanistan, and it's good for both the leaders. They can work together.
Paul, just let me take you back to a point you made earlier about the possible purpose, or one possible purpose of this attack being to deter the development of Islamic State forces in Afghanistan. Just tell us a little bit about why you think that might be the case.
Well, the Islamic State has indicated that it feels entitled to move into Afghanistan. It's a place which should be part of the caliphate, and it's going to operate there. It's had not only a kind of a violent response from the Taliban, but it's had a theological response. A long paper was written by Mullah Omar explaining that al-Baghdadi was not the true caliph. Properly instructed Muslims would not follow him, and the Taliban intends to fight him. But clearly, the Islamic State has got a reputation for ruthlessness and expansion, and it won't be enough just to denounce them. The Taliban will have to show that the Islamic State will not win, that the already existing violent Islamists called the Taliban are strong enough to resist the Islamic State and will not be persuaded by them. So there is this kind of hotting up of efforts, an increased kind of information warfare stress on the Taliban not needing not recognizing the Islamic State. And at the same time, the Taliban seems to have been involved in a kind of political offensive, not with the government, which it's in Kabul, which it refuses to recognize, but with tribal groups and constituencies, and in talks outside Afghanistan, sponsored by countries like Pakistan and China, where it's trying to wear away at the legitimacy of the Kabul government at the same time as resisting the pressures of the Islamic State.
Dr. Hotak, do you think that's true? Does the Islamic State have a presence in Afghanistan? Do you think that part of the purpose of this attack was to kind of deter them?
John, I think Paul gave a very good overview of an international view of how we see things in Afghanistan and the role of the different groups that are operating in Afghanistan. I'll tell you a little bit about what I learned by talking to some tribal leaders from eastern Afghanistan, and mainly from the Nangarhar province. In Afghanistan, people don't look at Taliban and the Islamic State the way we do in the West and the way we think of them. In Afghanistan, and especially in Nangarhar, the stories that I was told was two different factions fighting for power. And there is actually direct confrontation going on between what we call the Taliban and what we call the Islamic State members, as is known in Afghanistan, Daesh. The Daesh members are actually looking and searching for Taliban members, finding them and killing them wherever they can. And then the Taliban doing exactly the same, looking for Daesh members and finding them and killing them wherever they can. And at the moment in Nangarhar province, more specifically on the border regions with Pakistan, it seems like there is a lot of confrontation going on between these two groups. What do the people actually think about these groups, whether they are linked to Syria or not? It's totally different for the people on the local level in Afghanistan. They just see them mainly as proxies. Sometimes there is a lot of conspiracy theories claiming that either Daesh or the Taliban are working for certain international intelligence agencies. Some of these intelligence agencies are claimed to be regional, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and others, while others actually would point their fingers at China, Russia, and America. There is not only the Islamic State, Daesh group, or the Taliban. There is a lot of people. There are people who kidnap people, take money from them. There are other groups that are known with many different names. times. But what is important is that there are groups of militants who attack innocent civilians. They cause a lot of problems for these people. Afghanistan is a poor country. Life is already quite hard for Afghanistan. We usually get a lot of international support in media attention and international aid support in terms of charities working for many different other countries. But it seems like when it comes to Afghanistan, that is not the case. And I think there might be a lot of groups operating, but what we shouldn't forget is that at the end of the day, all these groups directly or indirectly cause mayhem for the people. And poor people, they need a lot of international help. Yeah.
Paul, how big would you say the Islamic State presence is in Afghanistan, or is it simply too murky for you to be able to tell?
I don't think there are any good figures. I would doubt if it was more than 100 or two, and they may not be much in touch. You know, they may be having to keep their heads down because, as we just heard, they're being exterminated wherever they appear by the Taliban, as well as others. But I think it's going to be a kind of ideological subversion thing in Afghanistan, as in the West. They will represent themselves as the true hope of true Muslims, and they will hope to appeal to a certain small but fanatically determined number.
Okay. Paul Schulte and Dr Mohammad Hotak here in the studio. Thanks very much for joining us, but that's all we've got time for on this part of the show. But stay tuned to the next part, where we'll be looking at the peace deal in Mali and the rest of today's news. That's after this break.